I think the Elden Ring has been shattered before. Before Marica, before the Erdtree, by someone or something. In a recent video, Tarnished Archaeologist proposed the idea that the entire in-game cycle of Elden Ring has happened before. The rise of an Empyrean destined for godhood, the journey of an usurper alongside a kindling maiden, and the burning of the sacred tree. Hallmarks of the transition from one age to the next. But I'm going to take this idea a step further than that. I think that the Elden Ring itself has been shattered before as well, and that the clues have been staring us right in the face for quite some time. But before I go on, if you are an Elden Ring fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. My dream is to make these videos full-time someday, and by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. Many have speculated about the shape the Elden Ring might have taken in previous eras, but in-game, there are only two distinct depictions that we can 100% confirm to be versions of it. There's the Elden Ring of the current age, Marica's Elden Ring, the one depicted on the box art, in the loading screen, and inside of the Eternal Queen herself. And there's this Elden Ring, the one seen in Marica's boss room in Farewelleon. As others have noted, this appears to be a wilder, more chaotic Elden Ring from a distant and ancient time. While there are many excellent theories about how this Elden Ring might have functioned, what stands out to me is not just the spreading roots or vines or whatever they are behind it, but that there are several more great runes attached to this Elden Ring than Marica's. So the question is, what happened to the roots and what happened to the now missing great runes? It's true that the Elden Ring is, essentially, customizable. It is the physical embodiment of the rules and laws of that particular era of the Lands Between, the way that Marica's Elden Ring, during the heyday of the Golden Order, didn't include the Rune of Death, thus removing the concept from existence. And in-game, it only takes two great runes to repair the Elden Ring and get the Age of Fracture ending. So in order to have a whole Elden Ring, one doesn't need to have every great rune, just some of them. This explains why the roots and the extra great runes we see in the Farewelleon Elden Ring don't need to be there. But it doesn't explain why they're missing in the first place. Or, put a different way, why they were not included in Marica's Elden Ring. As mentioned earlier, Marica removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring and gave it to Marica, her shadow, for both safekeeping and seemingly to keep the demigods in line. But we never hear about her removing other pieces of the Elden Ring. It's possible that she simply took them out or cast them aside after taking power, but I find that to be rather unlikely. If these runes were deliberately removed, then one would think she'd have bequeathed them to someone, as she did with her loyal shadow and destined death. I think it's far more likely that Marica, after gathering more than enough great runes to repair the broken Elden Ring, made some calculated decisions about which ones to include, which ones she wished to be trademarks of her new order. As for those that didn't quite make the cut, she probably did do the same thing with them that she did with the Rune of Death. I could see this being the case with Mesmer and his great rune. I'm willing to bet that he has one. In one of his interviews, Miyazaki suggested that the reason the DLC's cover art has the Impaler seated on one of the same thrones as the other demigods is that they wanted to make it clear that he is on par with Radahn, Malenia, and all of the other major players from the Shattering. Another way to do this would be by giving him a great rune. A great rune that's been in his possession since before the Lands of Shadow were cut off from the Lands Between. It would also help explain his appearance and abilities. As many have noted, his character design is basically a greatest hits album of traits that are no longer welcome in the Lands Between. He's got the elongated arms of a godskin, the eyes of someone who's engaged in dragon communion, and he's got a thing for snakes. noted traitors to the Erdtree. Perhaps these powers are supported by a primordial great rune, one laden with aspects of a prior era that Marica no longer wanted in her new order. But that still doesn't account for all of the other missing great runes, and there definitely appears to be more than just one. As for them, I wouldn't be surprised if Marica simply never recovered them at all. I suspect that we'll find them in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, in the possession of some of the expansion's most challenging bosses. The Lands of Shadow seem to be a region linked to the primordial days of the Lands Between, so it only makes sense that the primordial Great Runes would be found there. As for the root rune behind the Farewelleon Elden Ring, perhaps that one represents the Crucible itself, and is now the property of one of Marica's greatest enemies in this exiled land. This would also help explain why the Crucible went from being a sign of divinity to a sign of regression under the Golden Order. So that might be what happened to these Great Runes, but still, it doesn't answer how the Elden Ring was shattered before. To get to the bottom of that question, we have to head up to Farewelleon once again, where there's a lore detail that doesn't quite add up. According to his remembrance, Placidusax was Elden Lord in a time before the Erdtree, and he awaits the return of his god, who fled for unknown reasons. There's a lot of confusion about this, so before we get into how it relates to my theory, let's break down exactly what this means. I've seen many speculate that Placidusax's god might have been an outer god, perhaps the Fell God, the Formless Mother, or any other eldritch entity you'd like to toss into the mix. But to me, that just doesn't make sense. I think this is, instead, referring to the god of his age, the vessel for the primordial Elden Ring, the Marica of his time. In order for him to have been Elden Lord, there would have had to have been a corresponding god, just like the relationship between Godfrey and Marica, Radigan and Marica, us and Marica, or, if you follow through on her ending, us and Ronnie. So, with this text, I don't think the game is referring to any of the various outer gods, but instead whomever Placidusax served as Elden Lord. Now, on to the theory. Despite what the remembrance says, Placidusax's god can't have simply up and fled. That's just not how this works. There has to be more to the story here. If Placidusax's god was the Marica of this era, then, as mentioned earlier, they would have been the vessel for the Elden Ring. So if they just ran away, then the Elden Ring would have gone with them. And there is no way in hell the Greater Will would have let that happen. Which begs the question, what really happened to Placidusax's god? Well, this wouldn't be the first time we've been intentionally misled about the whereabouts of a god in Elden Ring. In the game's opening cutscene, the unnamed narrator says,
"Now, Queen Marica the Eternal is nowhere to be found."
So Queen Marica is nowhere to be found, and Placidusax's god fled. It's by no means a perfect comparison, but those are fairly similar statements. It's easy to forget because the game doesn't linger long on the idea that Queen Marica is missing, but only finger reader Enya and Gideon seem to know that she's been imprisoned inside the Erdtree this whole time. Perhaps saying that Placidusax's god fled functioned the same way in her time as saying that Marica is nowhere to be found in ours. A convenient lie to hide the truth, that Placidusax's god shattered the Elden Ring and ended up being imprisoned by the Greater Will just like her successor. As the Memory of Grace states, it is merely a cycle, and perhaps it is indeed a cycle right down to breaking up with the Greater Will, throwing away the Elden Ring, and getting sentenced to house arrest inside your sacred tree while the rest of the world feels like their god has left them on red. Of course, if this is true, then it means that Marica, or someone loyal to her, like her Elden Lord or her Shadow, would have needed to kill Placidusax's god to complete her journey. That might be what we see happening here in the story trailer. This certainly could be the case, but I'm not the biggest fan of it, mostly because it would be hard for Marica to seduce and betray this god all while she was imprisoned by the Big GW. As far as I know, there's no FaceTime in the lands between. Plus, based on the sequence of events shown in the story trailer, it looks like whatever Marica is up to here preceded her attack on the Shadow Tree, which, in my view, is likely when she usurped the god of the previous age. Personally, I have a different interpretation of this scene, which I'll be discussing momentarily. Further evidence that the Elden Ring was shattered before can be found at the Divine Towers. In-game, their entire purpose is to invigorate the Great Runes with divine power. If the Elden Ring had not been broken into pieces before Marica's shattering, then there'd be no reason for these towers to exist at all, because the Elden Ring would have always been complete and teeming with the blessings of the Greater Will. With the Elden Ring shattered, I suspect that the Greater Will instructed its vassals, the Two Fingers, to submit their lands between draft cards, which led to Marica being named an Empyrean. Alongside her Elden Lord Godfrey, she probably went on a journey that was rather similar to our own, claiming the great runes that compose her Elden Ring, and invigorating them with the strength of the Greater Will at the Divine Towers. But in order to repair the Elden Ring, one, generally speaking, needs a mending rune. In my video breaking down the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer, I proposed the idea that what we see here is Marica pulling the Rune of Life, a rune long speculated about by other creators, from the womb of a corpse. To be more specific, I don't think it's just the Rune of Life, but the Mending Rune of Life. In-game, there are 3 obtainable mending runes: the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, the Mending Rune of Perfect Order, and the Mending Rune of the Fell Curse. And each one is taken from a corpse: Thea's, Gold Mask's, and the Dung Eater's. Thus, while the complete process for creating a mending rune is unclear, one thing is for certain: doing so requires someone's death. So perhaps the seduction and betrayal mentioned by the unnamed follower of Miquella is the tale of how Marica took the form of Radagon, had an affair with someone known for her life-giving prowess, and then killed her while she was pregnant to create the Mending Rune of Life. So, to summarize, I believe that Placidusax's god didn't actually flee. Rather, they shattered the Elden Ring and were imprisoned by the Greater Will, just as we're told that Marica is nowhere to be found during the opening cutscene. In the interregnum that followed, Marica was named Empyrean, and alongside her Elden Lord Godfrey and Mesmer the Impaler, went on an odyssey similar to our own, collecting the great runes that would later compose her Elden Ring, empowering them at the Divine Towers, creating her signature rune, the Mending Rune of Life, from the corpse of a woman she impregnated and betrayed as Radagon. This, in turn, explains why the Elden Ring of Farewelleon looks so different than the one we're familiar with. But that's just my theory. What do you guys think? Fortunately, Shadow of the Erdtree is drawing ever closer, so we won't have to wait much longer to find out if I'm onto something or just throwing darts at a tinfoil dartboard. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to the incredible Farewelleon, who's allowed me to use her covers from the Game of Thrones soundtrack for all of my upcoming Elden Ring videos. To check out all of her music, just follow the link down below in the description box. Huge shout out to James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, and Pathonian, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.